Can you hear me? 여러분 안녕하세요. Maybe they 오늘 멘토링 오신 거 다들 환영하고요. 시작하기 전에 한 가지만 안내 말씀드릴게요. 일단 지금 제 목소리 들리세요? 채팅창으로, 네네. 자, 오늘 글로벌 게이트웨이 학생들 참석했을 텐데요. 참석한 학생들은 채팅창에 학번이랑 이름 남겨주세요. 그리고 오늘 우리 미국 대학에서 온 교환학생 2명이 멘토링을 해줄 거고, 여기 주제는 보시다시피 Life as an International Student예요. 끝나고 나서 질문을 받을 거니까 이제 PPT를 프레젠테이션을 보다가 궁금한 게 생기면 질문 받는 시간에 질문을 해주시면 됩니다. 자, 그러면은 제가 마이크를 넘길게요.
But can you bring it here? All right. I'll start then. Hi, everyone. My name is Molly Bogart. I'm from Niagara Falls area of New York State, and I'm majoring in linguistics and global international studies as a third-year student at the State University, New York at Oswego. And this is Dana.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dana Tran. I'm from Los Angeles. I go to California State University, Long Beach, and I am a fourth-year student majoring in international studies.
자, 여러분 지금 화면이 공유가 됐는데 공유된 화면 지금 다 보이세요? 채팅으로 좀 알려주실래요?
So we've prepared a presentation today called Life as an International Student, and we're just going to be talking about how life is as an international student abroad. And with that, I'd like to start with the first point of being an international student, which is research. So before you go anywhere, you need to research a lot of different things. One of the things that you should be researching is visas. This is the most important because otherwise you won't be able to go anywhere. The process differs between countries. Some countries have more paperwork involved in the visa process than others. So you should be sure to make sure that you have everything correct before making any appointments and having all your paperwork together so that when you apply for your visa, the process is as smooth as possible. And the second most important thing that you should research is finances. Some countries are more expensive than others. So if you're going to the US, for example, unfortunately, it is one of the more expensive countries to study abroad in. So you should research any loans or if like the cost of living in the country that you want to go to. I know for the US specifically, there's certain banks that will let you use credit or they will let you withdraw cash from the local ATM without any international fees. So before you go, you should check if there's something similar available for your Korean banks. And then another thing that you'd want to research is the weather. You might have a preference for your weather depending on where you want to go. Knowing the weather will give you an idea of what to pack. When I was researching about the weather in Korea, I actually didn't know that Daegu would be really hot and humid. So that was a surprise for me, but luckily I had a rough idea of what the weather was going to be like. So I knew I didn't need to bring any heavy jackets or anything like that. And another thing that you want to research is housing, whether or not you want to stay in your school dormitory versus staying in an apartment off campus. If you want to stay in off-campus housing, such as an apartment, some apartments may be furnished and some may not be furnished. So that is an important aspect to look into when you're searching for housing. And then also, if you're going to have a roommate, if it's possible, you should get in contact with your roommate before you fly out or before you arrive, so that you can coordinate with your roommate what items they are going to bring, so that you know that when you arrive, you don't have to buy certain things once you arrive, or you don't have to bring certain things from home. And then additionally, you'll want to research what to pack. And what I mean by that is additional things that are not paperwork or school related. If you're staying in an apartment, you might need to buy certain kitchen appliances or certain furnitures if it's not furnished, or if it's only partially furnished. And what you'll want to pack specifically depends on where you're going and the amount of time that you're going to be abroad. If you're only going to study abroad for the spring semester, then you probably won't want to bring any winter coats or any heavy winter clothing, because you'll know it'll be warmer during that time of year. And likewise, if you're staying for an entire year, you might want to bring more things to pack, depending on where you're going and your preferences and what you do want to bring. And another thing that you want to research before you go is the laws and any social customs. For the United States in particular, there's federal laws, and then there's laws that differ between certain states. So one of the biggest laws is revolving around alcohol. The U.S. laws around alcohol are different compared to the rest of the world, but we'll get into that later. And then, of course, you want to carefully research what school or what program you want to do when you're abroad. Researching a school or the program will depend on your major, whether you want your classes to count towards your major or your minor, or just any place that you're interested in going. And if you do want the classes that you take abroad to count towards your coursework, you should make sure that the school actually offers the classes that you need. And yeah, so we're going to be talking about safety.
All right, so I'm going to be talking about safety, and I'd like to highlight just like 3 main points and branch off from them. So the first one is don't go it alone, meaning always take someone with you. Don't go out late by yourself, and don't follow someone that you don't really know well, and never meet in places late at night. I'm sure all of you guys know this, but just particularly in a foreign country, you never know what part of the city you're in. You're not familiar with where you are at, so just be mindful. And then also never leave your items unattended. So in the US compared to Korea, people aren't as responsible with respecting other people's items, not just in the US, but other countries too. They're not very respectful with other people's items. So don't leave your computer in a cafe alone. Don't leave your laptop in a library alone. And also another thing to mention is wireless networks or like Wi-Fi. They're not as good in public spaces as Korea. So sometimes it's best not to connect to them. And a lot of times in the US, we've had instances of people stealing information from hacking through wireless networks. So if a Wi-Fi network is not specified in a restaurant, library, or other public place, then it's probably best not to connect to it. And then the last one would be keep alert and be observant, meaning keep your expensive items or cash on your person at all times. Don't leave it out in the open, and don't make it known that you're carrying a lot of cash. Don't leave your phone or your wallet in your back pocket exposed. So don't show people that you have some expensive items on them because you don't know exactly what type of people you're around, or again, what part of the city. So just be mindful of these things and to keep yourself safe.
So next, I'd like to talk about sightseeing. I mean, if you're in another country, you'll obviously want to be a tourist for a bit and go around and see the sights. And there's different types of events and places depending on your budget. You don't always have to do the really well-known, more famous tourist attractions. There's all sorts of different types of events and places that you can go depending on what you like and your budget. And so one type of sightseeing activity that you can do is going to a local event. This is going to require a little bit of research on your part because these are usually just restricted to a community. And these are usually cheaper than going to a really famous tourist spot because it's smaller in capacity and it's less crowded. And then, of course, there's also amusement parks. I'm sure everyone knows Disneyland and stuff like that, right? So that is also one thing that you could do, but it is more on the expensive side. And unfortunately, depending on where you're staying, they do tend to be a little bit farther out. So getting there can be a little bit tricky, but I will touch on that in a little bit. And then another type of sightseeing activity that you could do is going to a museum. Some museums offer free admission on certain days, or if you have a valid student ID, you can get discounted admission. Again, you'd have to research a little bit before you go. And the same applies to zoos, aquariums, and botanical gardens. These are really, really good if you like nature. It's especially if you are studying abroad in a city. In the cities, there's not a lot of greenery. So going to an aquarium, a zoo, or a botanical garden, and it's just a nice way to get away from the city and enjoy nature. And these are usually fairly cheap as well. I don't, at least from the ones that I live near, I don't think they offered free admission or discounted admission, unfortunately, but they are quite inexpensive. So for sightseeing, you really need to research the type of events and places that are within your own interests and again, within your own budget. And who knows, you might find it more rewarding or satisfying doing these small local events or going to these small local places compared to going to a really big tourist attraction. And for getting around to these places and events, there's many different types of transportation that you can take. You can take public transportation like the bus or the subway. Unfortunately, in the US, public transportation isn't that good once you leave the really big city areas. So in that case, it might be better to use a ride sharing app, or if you have a friend who knows how to drive, you can ask them. For ride sharing, some really popular apps that we use in the US are Uber and Lyft, but those can really fluctuate in price. So it's best to plan a specific time when you would like to go wherever you're going. You can also take the subway, but like I mentioned earlier, it's really only in big cities and they're actually quite non-existent once you leave really big cities. So again, that just depends on if it's available to you if you're staying in a big city. And then another way you can get around is taking the airplane. This is more so if you're in the United States and you want to travel between states, or you can also take the airplane inside certain states if it's big enough. So for example, in California, it's a 6-hour drive from Los Angeles to San Francisco, and some people just don't want to drive that long. So you can also take an airplane from Los Angeles to San Francisco, and it's only about like less than an hour ride. So it really depends if you are like your location and if you're able to take the airplane. Like I said, taking the airplane is more so if the state that you're staying in is big enough to warrant an airplane ride, but otherwise your best bet for getting around would be ride sharing by either using one of the ride sharing apps that I mentioned earlier, or if just asking a friend if you have a friend that knows how to drive. Okay, next we are going to be talking about meeting new people. So
Yeah, so here are a few points just to help you guys branch out and meet new people while you're studying abroad. So using English to your advantage is really important because chances are, whether you're in the United States or you're in another country, people are going to know some sort of English and you're going to be able to use your English skills, which is a good chance for you to improve your English, but also if you're meeting other international students from other countries, you can use your English to your advantage when making friends. So don't be afraid at using your English. There's going to be people just like you who are coming to study in another country who aren't as confident or don't use English as much as you. So to add to that, don't overthink your interactions because chances are other people want to be friends with you just as much as you want to be friends with them. So, and there's also people who want to share or understand or learn about your culture in Korea just as much as you might want to learn about another country's culture. So that being said, try something new. It's important as an international student to make your experience as international as you possibly can, because it's really your only opportunity to study abroad and you don't want to have any regrets after your time abroad. So for example, I know a group of friends that I've had in the US who have told me that I'm the only domestic student or American student that they have been friends with, and they kind of regret at the end of their semester that they didn't make more friends or branch out of their community of people from their own country and or practice their English skills. So when I say try something new, I mean like don't be afraid to break out of your comfort zone and or your comfort bubble of people from Korea and make new friends, because it's your opportunity to try something new. And a way to do that really is to join clubs or extracurricular activities. It's a really good opportunity because there's so many options and you can just find one of your hobbies that you like, and chances are on a campus abroad, they're going to have an opportunity for you to pursue that hobby with other students who really like it. So at least in the US, clubs are kind of casual in the sense that you can come and go as you please. You can join one or two meetings and then not come the rest of the semester, because they're aware that you're international students and that you're not here long term and that you just want to make friends. So joining a club doesn't necessarily mean you have to join all the meetings. And you can also join non-campus events and activities like Dana had mentioned in the previous slide. There's community events that you can go to with friends, or you can even make your own events on campus. So for example, in this picture down here, we had an on-campus meeting for Chinese students to make dumplings for the Lunar New Year at my university. And they invited American students to join too. And that's how we got connected to a lot of international students and friends. So don't be afraid to make your own events as well, because other people will probably want to join. And then, like I said before, break out of your comfort zone, branch out on a limb, try something new. Don't let cultural differences stop you from trying something in a new country. And remember that studying abroad is an experience. It's not necessarily a vacation. So you have to think, I'm a student first and I'm a tourist second, but being a student can't doesn't stop you from also experiencing what it's like abroad.
So the next point I'd like to touch on is cuisine. Really exciting getting to experience food in a new country, in a new culture. And so what you'll be eating and where you'll be eating depends on your housing situation and your food preferences. If you are staying in the dormitories of your school, there's meal plans available. I know in New York, you can adjust your meal plan within the first 2 to 3 weeks of school. So if you, for example, sign up for 3 meals a day, but then you decide later on that you only want 1 meal a day because you want to eat out more, that's also fine. And you have the first couple weeks of the semester to do that. And then the next option that's available is grocery stores. These are good if you live in an apartment, or some dorms also have a kitchen area that you can use. Not all dorms will, so it's best to look that up before you go. Some really popular grocery chains in America are Aldi's and Trader Joe's. If you want to find a grocery store that specializes in a certain cuisine, such as an Asian grocery store or an Italian grocery store or so on and so forth, you might have to do a little bit of research. I know that one major Korean grocery store chain in the US is H Mart. But for other smaller grocery stores that aren't chains, you're gonna have to do some research. There's also a service app called Yummy Buy in the East Coast, and it's an Asian grocery delivery service. So you can filter it by country and cuisine, and you can have it delivered right to your door. And then other than grocery stores, there's also restaurants. I mean, there's going to be an abundance of restaurants no matter where you're at. And for the US specifically, we do have a tipping culture. That's something I know that Korea doesn't have. And so when you're in America, it is really, really, really important to tip at dine-in restaurants. I know in New York, the minimum tip starts at 10%, but in California, where I'm from, you start at 10% or 15% minimum, sorry. And you only tip at dine-in restaurants. And so what I mean by dine-in restaurants is a restaurant where you have a waiter or a waitress who comes and takes your order, and then afterwards they bring the food to your table. Tip isn't necessary at cafes, fast food restaurants, or cafeteria style restaurants. And what I mean by cafeteria style restaurants is it's a style of restaurant where you order at the cash register, and then the food is available at the counter once it's ready. And you go to the counter and you bring your own food to your table. So at those types of eating establishments, tip isn't required, although it is nice if you do tip. And for cafeteria style restaurants and dine-in restaurants, and also some cafes, they usually close around 9 p.m. And this restaurant closing times will depend on whether or not you're in the city or somewhere more suburban. In the city, restaurants do tend to close later, but in general, in the United States, most restaurants close around 9 p.m. And they have what is called a last call or a last order. And this more so applies to dine-in restaurants, where they will stop taking your order up to 30 minutes before they close the restaurant. And this is to give the staff time to clean the restaurant or clean the kitchen and get ready to close the restaurant. It's in general though, it's a general courtesy if you don't order this towards last call. And for fast food restaurants specifically, it's a general courtesy to not order 15 minutes before they close. And reservations are recommended for big parties. Again, this more so applies to dine-in restaurants. But if you have a big party, and especially during the weekends or the holidays when it tends to get really busy, it's better if you call at least a day in advance and reserve a table. And if you don't want to do a meal plan, go to a grocery store or go to a restaurant, there's also delivery services available. But what I will say is that at least in the US, they're not as good as they are here in Korea. Some popular delivery service apps are Uber Eats, DoorDash, and Postmates, but they are really expensive because you have to add in tip and you have to add in the delivery fees. And then there's also a lot of these apps will charge service fees. And so what would be originally like maybe a $10 meal could end up costing around $20 or $30. So it's just really not recommended, but they are available to you if you do want to use them. Okay, and next,
All right, so I'm just gonna touch on experiencing a new culture. So in a new culture, there's a new way of doing things. So you're not in your country anymore. So you need to slightly leave your culture behind in a sense because there's gonna be cultural clashes, things that are different that you're not expecting or not used to. So you need to be aware of some of those things. As Dana mentioned in the first slide about research, you should research some cultural differences and things that might deter you or take away from your experience if you choose a certain country. So you're not a guest, you're not a host, you're a guest in a country. So you don't necessarily need to partake in a culture or a specific way of doing something, but you should know that you should not expect others to do the same things as you. And you might find certain daily habits of like a roommate, if they're from a different country, to be an issue or something hard to look past. So it's something important to think about if you're going to another country, because chances are you're not going to be rooming with somebody from your own country or who has the same cultural values or daily life habits as you. So if these things really bother you, at least in the US, we have ways of solving it with like a resident assistant. We call them RAs. And you can discuss with your roommate. I highly suggest though, if you have a cultural difference or there's something that's bothering you, communication is the best way to go about it. Because chances are the other student is doing a cultural habit from their own country or that they're used to, and they're not thinking that it's rude or disrespectful in any way. So just remember that you're a guest in another country, and then be open and respectful to other people's home cultures. And like I said, don't expect them to do the same way you do at home. So just be open to a new culture, respectful of them. It might feel like they're disrespecting you, but there's bigger issues in life than a cultural difference. And just be aware of things that might come off as rude or to you that might not be to them. So the best way, like I said, communicate. So that includes like communicating as in with rules and social cues and customs. The biggest one, it might sound silly in the US, but there's always people who tell international students that come here that our plumbing system is completely different from other people or from other countries. So the biggest issue is with toilet paper. We always put it in the toilet in the US. Other countries don't do it as much. So whenever international students come here, though, they have people who tell them these things because they're unaware of these daily habits or cultural things that they don't do in other countries. So be aware of like nitty-gritty things or things that might not be openly talked about that are necessary for living in another country. So just be aware of things like that. And another one, when Dana was talking about cuisine and restaurants, a cultural cue that we have in the US is don't call for a waiter or like say over here or something like that, because it's considered rude, and not only rude to the waiter, but disrespectful to the other customers who are dining. What you should do instead in the US at least is make eye contact or wave your hand, say, excuse me, just so you're not interrupting the mood in the restaurant. So be aware of like these cultural things. And as before, we mentioned alcohol is a huge issue in other countries because everyone has a different drinking culture. At least in the US, all the states have a drinking age of 21. So if you're under 21, you're not allowed to have any alcohol. You're not allowed to buy alcohol. You're not allowed to bring it from your home country to the US. So depending on the university or state though, if you are over 21, you can have alcohol in your dorm. Again, depends on the university, but only if you're 21 or older, and it's only a certain amount you're allowed to have. And if you are over 21, you're unable to buy alcohol if you have a underage friend with you. So just be aware of these types of things, especially on campus, because the culture is going to be different and it might create a misunderstanding. And then again, for the drinking culture in the US, we aren't allowed to drink outside or in the open at all. I don't know if it's necessarily illegal. I want to say yes, but it's definitely not a cultural habit and definitely not something you should be doing as an international student. So be aware if you're over 21, just of these types of drinking culture. And if you're in a bar or a club and you buy a drink and there's somebody who serves it to you, you must pay them a tip. Even though you're not sitting at a table like a restaurant, it's seen as rude and not a very good custom to not tip them. So it may seem a little overwhelming, some of these cultural things, but it's important to research, like we mentioned before, keep them in mind, discuss them with your other group mates that are coming to that country with you. If you have questions, the people who are like planning the program are always there to help you, and they can give you resources if you're having trouble. But the biggest issue again is to communicate, communicate, and communicate.
So next, I'd like to talk about homesickness. This is a really big one, especially for me. I really struggled with being homesick when I first landed in Korea and I had to do my quarantine and I wasn't allowed to have any human contact with anyone other than the person who would deliver my food to my room. And so homesickness can happen to everyone. It also can happen to you at different points in your study abroad program. Like for example, for me, it hit me a lot harder when I first landed in Korea compared to now that I'm starting school and I'm meeting more people and I have friends and I talk to my friends and my classmates every day. But one important thing to keep in mind is that you're not alone. First and foremost, you you can make friends in the country that you're staying at, and then also you do also have friends back home. And so one way you can kind of alleviate your homesickness is to join school or community events. This just really helps you keep your mind off of, being lonely, and you can also make new friends from it. I know a lot of universities have international student clubs, and so joining international student clubs, as we mentioned earlier, it's a good way to make friends, and you can also meet other people from your home country as well. And additionally, I think it's really important to keep in touch with your friends and family back home. For me personally, I know my mom worries for me a lot. And so I do try to make it a point to video call with my mom at least once a week. And so I set aside a schedule once once a week to call my parents back home, just so that they know that I'm doing well and there's nothing wrong that's going on, and so that I also know that they're doing well and that there's also nothing going on with them. It's really up to you to find a schedule that works for you because of the time differences. And so another way you can kind of help battle the homesickness, one of my personal favorites is finding a restaurant that serves one of your favorite dishes, or to cook your own favorite foods from home if you are able to go to the grocery store and you have a kitchen available. Like we mentioned earlier, like being in a different culture 24/7 can be really overwhelming. And so finding a restaurant that serves your favorite dish, or just cooking your favorite dish from home, is a good way to remind yourself of home, and to also just get back in touch with your own culture. And lastly, we would just like to kind of wrap this up by saying that studying abroad, no matter where you go, is a really life-changing experience. It's a once in a lifetime experience. Not many people get to say that they lived in a foreign country for 6 months or longer. I know, because of the whole COVID situation going on right now, and like the whole world situation is just really crazy. And so I know some of my friends, they didn't get into their first choice country or their first choice school or their first choice program, but they still decided to go ahead with the program that they chose. And when they came back, they had nothing to say except positive experiences, and they don't regret they don't regret their choices at all.
And then it's also important to mention that the friends that you make when studying abroad are going to be lifelong friends, because your shared experiences abroad is a bond that can't be broken. Honestly, experiencing new culture together really makes international students come together as lifelong friends, and you come out on the other side with a better experience and a better understanding of other cultures and people, and even your language skills you'll find will improve with time. So just be aware that you're not going to stay in a bubble the whole time. You're going to have experiences that no one else back home will be able to share with you, and that's what makes these friends last for forever.
And also, studying abroad anywhere is a really, really good chance to improve your career skills. I know for in particular in the US, if depending on the field that you want to go to, if your potential employer sees on your resume that you studied abroad in a certain country for 6 months to a year, then they are more likely to hire you, because it's seen as you being very culturally open-minded and ready and more willing to try new things. And so, and also depending on the program that you choose, you can learn a different way of doing things, or different skills that you can apply to your future career goals. For example, if you are studying engineering here, and you pick the school that you go to might be more hands-on rather than theory-based. So it's a good way to really round out your skills. And then most importantly is that your language skills will greatly improve, because you are being immersed in the culture every day, and you're using the language every day, compared to just going to class and then leaving class and coming back to class and only using your language skills in class, you actually get to use it every day in everyday situations. And it really strengthens your retention and your knowledge of how to use the language and learning nuances of certain words or certain phrases and things like that. So it's a really good way to drastically improve your language skills.
And then finally, I'd just like to add that the fourth main point that we wanted to discuss, I mean, of course, there's more life-changing aspects to studying abroad, but the last one is being an ambassador for your country is something that you can't do anywhere else. It's an honor to be a representative of your own country. Even an unofficial ambassador is the best way for students to rewrite stigmas or things that are attached to their countries that might not be true, or even represent your country as a culture and language. And not only are you receiving multicultural and diverse information or aspects to life, but you're also going to be a representative of how you do things in Korea and how life as a student or life as an individual is like in Korea for you or your family or your friends. And it's an important privilege to have, I think, as a student. So in conclusion, we just like to open this up for questions. We have our information here for Instagram and Kakao Talk and email. So if you don't feel comfortable asking questions here, you can also contact us that way. Just be sure to add a title to the email or let us know how you got our information. So if you have any questions, you can write in the chat or even turn on the microphone.
혹시 질문하실 거 있으면 지금 채팅 박스에 하시거나 아니면은 마이크 켜시고 이야기하시면 돼요. 그러면 여기 지금 학생들 인스타 아이디랑 카카오톡 아이디랑 이메일 주소 있으니까 혹시 나중에라도 질문 있는 학생들은 질문하시고요. 그리고 마지막으로 이제 조금 늦게 들어와서 채팅 박스에 학번이랑 이름 안 친 글로벌 게이트웨이 학생들은 남겨주시고요. 그래야 제가 출석 체크를 할 수 있을 것 같아요. 그리고 안내 말씀 하나 드리면 다음 주 수요일 같은 시간에 복수하기 교환학생 갔다 온 선배들이 하는 멘토링이 또 준비가 돼 있어요. 자세한 사항은 제가 이메일로 다시 안내할 거고요. 네, 또 참석을 부탁드립니다.
저 혹시 질문 하나 해도 될까요?
네네. 이 학생들한테 하는 거예요?
네네.
그럼 영어로 해주실 거죠?
네, 해볼게요. Thank you for your many tips, useful tips, and I want to ask you how to engage in class more actively. You know, I'm raised in Korea, and I'm not familiar with discussion class style, so I'm just used to listen to the professor's explanation, but I heard that in US there are many discussion style classes. So can you give me some tips for engaging in classes more actively?
Yeah, right. In the US, we do have more discussion-based lectures. Oftentimes professors will ask questions and then kind of go silent and wait for students to raise their hand or speak up individually. If there's a small group, usually like maybe 20 students or less, it's more free and open. You don't have to raise your hand as much, but it's still kind of respectful to raise your hand and wait for the professor to call on you, because chances are other students also have answers to the question. But yeah, that's a good point to make because I found that too in Korea, there's more lecture style and not so much discussion. And oftentimes in the US, they will ask you a question in the middle of the lecture. So you need to pay attention the whole time if there's a question or not, which is sometimes hard for international students, to be honest, because you need to understand how in English people ask a question. Some people in other countries, like I know China, they have a specific ending of the sentence that indicates a question. But I think in Korea, you guys use tone as the same way in English. So it might be easier for you than other students to know when a question is being asked and raise your hand. So that's a good question. Thank you. I see someone in the comment. You said that communication and making friends are important. Do you have any particular attitude or tips for making foreign friends? Do you want to answer?
Well, should I say how I did it? Because maybe my I well okay, at least I think I am a pretty shy person myself. So I actually knew Molly from, or I didn't know her before coming to this program, but I noticed that she was basically in almost all of my classes. We basically literally only we basically have the exact same schedule, except she has an additional class that I don't have. So I remember in one particular class when we did notice that we had the same schedule, she actually just asked me for my contact information. And I had invited her out to study with me one time. And then from there, we just started talking about our interests and stuff. And that's how we are friends now. So I would say a tip or attitude for making foreign friends is to definitely be more open-minded because you know, they're a different culture and background from you. And
Yeah, absolutely. So also when you're, like Dana said, when you're in class and you're looking around, you can kind of see who's in your class and who's not, who's sitting next to you. Oftentimes, at least in the US, it's really common for the first day of class to make friends with who you're sitting next to. Just say, hi, my name is so-and-so. And then most of the time they'll ask you, oh, where are you from? So these types of questions, you might want to prepare like an introduction, especially the first day of class, because for me, even as an American student with other Americans, that's kind of the friend group you stay with for the whole semester. Or if you have a project or presentation, you usually gravitate towards those people that you met the first day. So I think that's a really important thing to add. And like I said before, clubs and activities, but also when you're in the dining hall or in the hallway, people might pass you, at least in the US, I can't speak for other countries, and say hello or come up to you or notice that you might be from another country or that you don't know where you are or where you're going. It's perfectly fine in the US and actually most expected for students, American or not, to ask other upperclassmen or students who go to that school where a classroom is if you don't know. So don't worry about not knowing where you are in the university, because there's always people that are always willing to help you and welcome you into the university. And that's a really good way to make friends as well, getting their contact information while walking to class or something of that nature.
I hope that answers the question.
May I ask a question? Can you hear me?
Oh, yes, yes. You can
Oh, okay.
go ahead.
Okay. Thank you for today's peer mentoring. And I'm curious about two things. And one is about the COVID situation in US these days. And another one is what was the most biggest difference between US and Korea? And how did you overcome it?
I think it might be different for both of us.
Let's start with the first part, the COVID situation. How should I put this?
I will say it depends on the state like that you live in, because like we said, there's federal law and state law in the US. So I think California will be different from New York, maybe.
Last I checked, at least for my state, specifically for Los Angeles, since that's the area that I'm from, my friends from back home had told me that they had removed the mask mandate, but since cases were spiking, they enforced the mask mandate again. So I think I want to say in California, at least from what my friends have been telling me, as of last week, like cases are going down especially because more people are getting boosted. But
For New York State, we don't have any mask requirements whatsoever. I think a lot of it has to do with now that it's becoming summer, a lot of people are being outside and aren't in a big building anymore, so there isn't as much spread. A lot of people are vaccinated in New York State already as well. So it used to be for a long time that even if the state doesn't have a mask requirement, universities do. But I know, I think a month ago, my university took away the mask mandate. So even in class, you don't have to wear your mask. So I think it's been opening a lot more in the US. It also depends, like I said, the state and the situation of each state. But yes, and then for the second.
And also to add on to that, I've found that for private businesses, like really small owned mom and pop local shops, that they do enforce mask mandates, but if it's a bigger chain store, then they don't really enforce it as well. So there's also that. And
I think for those types of places, it's more of a liability thing because they're smaller enterprises or companies. They don't want to get in trouble with having cases in their places. So sometimes it's just more respectful to wear a mask if you're not sure, or if you're comfortable with wearing a mask, then you probably should. It's again, it's on a person by person basis, but for the most part, at least in New York State, it's not required. What was your second question again? Sorry.
Okay.
Oh, biggest difference. Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
oh, the biggest cultural difference. Oh, what should I say? There's a lot of things. Should I mention like biggest cultural differences when talking to people, or is that what you would like to know, or just
Yeah. Anything.
okay? Well, I do kind of have a big one. My this could be good or bad depending on how you take it. But I know for me, my roommate is Korean, and so sometimes she'll tell me things really bluntly, and I have found that a lot of times it does offend me and it does hurt my feelings, but I try to remember that, you know, English isn't her first language, and also that I don't know if this is true, but for how Koreans, they are just more direct compared to what I'm used to in the US. You know, if it's between friends or just acquaintances, basically not your employer or not anyone like, you know, like your professor or anyone like that, then you're not as straightforward. You use different words so that it doesn't come off as mean or rude, but my roommate just kind of uses certain words, or she's just more direct about it, and it has offended me before, and I have told her like, hey, that kind of hurt my feelings, and she apologizes, but I just try to keep in mind that she doesn't mean to be offensive. It's just her lack of vocabulary, and like she just doesn't know because of like culture differences. So I'd say that's the biggest one for me.
I think for me, to be honest, it's in restaurants, Koreans always like, not always, but in certain restaurants, they're like yelling for the waiter or somebody who's serving food, or when they walk in, they order by yelling to the back of the restaurant. And I think that's a little shocking for me because it's rude and disrespectful kind of in the US. And so I know when I'm in Korea, I'm not as like keen toward it. So I think that's the biggest cultural difference I've seen. And I don't do that when I go in a Korean restaurant because I find it disrespectful, but I get shocked when others do. So I think that's the biggest difference for me.
Thank you for answering the questions.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for your questions.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Hello.
Yes.
Okay, I have a question. First of all, thank you for your great presentation. But actually, I'll participate in the summer session program in the in UC Berkeley. So like, I'd like to know that I'm planning to apply for an undergraduate research internship program. Is it even possible? Yeah, I want to know that if it's possible.
If it's possible to apply.
To apply for that, yeah. For your information, I'm majoring in computer science.
I don't know too much about that, unfortunately, because I don't go to UC Berkeley, and so you'd have to search it on their website. I'd say it's definitely possible, though, and you just have to keep in mind deadlines, and then also because you said you were going in the summer, right?
Yeah, summer session program.
Yeah, you'd have to check the deadline and the requirements for that, because every school has different requirements and deadlines and stuff like that. Usually, from my own personal experience, is that if it's like a summer related or summer date program, that you would have to apply towards the beginning of the spring, just so that in the case for like international students, it gives the school enough time to process your legal paperwork. Yeah, but again, you'd have to check on the deadline for that. I'm sorry, I can't really answer more than that.
And even if you're unable to go this semester, if you're able to, definitely look into the information for next year because it's a good opportunity, I think, to study abroad in any capacity that you can.
Okay, thank you so much.
지금 시간이 이제 거의 1시가 다 돼서 이제 맞춰야 할 것 같아요. 지금 시간 중에 질문을 못한 학생들은 몰리랑 데이나에게 이메일이나 카톡으로 질문해 주시기 바랍니다. 오늘 수고해준 이 두 학생에게 감사 인사해 주시면 고맙겠고요. 시간 내서 참여해 주셔서 감사합니다.
Bye guys. Thanks for listening to our presentation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.